So we're going to begin silk screening or screen printing as our next project. So let me discuss with you some materials we're going to be working with. So the first is, how do we make our screen? So you can buy pre-made screens, or you can buy frames and silk screening or screening material to place into those. We are using an embroidery hoop for our framework, and we are using a fine polyester sheer fabric. But I wanted to talk with you about what I've used in the past. I'm not sure what this material is called. This was actually bought, oh man, probably about 15 to 20 years ago. It was early on in my teaching career. And this is just something I bought at Walmart. It's a very stiff material. It is see-through. And this works with screen printing. It allows enough ink to pass through, and this also especially works well with working with paints, like temper paints. In fact, that's what I had bought this for. I did this with a 7th grade group of students, in which we stretched that material inside an embroidery hoop. They did not attach their stencil. I attached this one because I use it as an example every year. But they did not attach their stencil, but they did use stencil paper to design and cut out their imagery for their screen print. And we just then would lay down their stencil onto the paper, and we'd put the screen over top of it, and then we would go through the process of using a squeegee. In this case, we used a piece of cardboard to help force the temper paint through the fabric, and they would print that way, and it's worked well for us. Further on into my career, I had students that wanted to try printing onto fabric itself. And this will work with fabric. I have done it on my aprons I have here at school. But I started to research a little bit more about printmaking, especially screen printing. I never took printmaking in college. I substituted it with a class on photography instead. So for me, I'm kind of learning along with you. So I've been doing a lot of research on screen printing. And you can, as I mentioned, buy the frames, or you can buy the screening material. And so I have bought some screening material. This is again a polyester mesh made specifically for screen printing. And I've been using it to stretch it again around and inside of embroidery hoops. Let me grab one here. And this is what I've been using somewhat with another material. So this I have to order. I don't have an area local to me that sells this material. And with Amazon, usually it's in stock and it comes fairly quickly. But I was looking for maybe a more local source. So I went to my local Joann Fabrics, and I purchased a sheer polyester. It's kind of like what you would purchase maybe for sheer curtains hanging in your home. And I've been experimenting with that, and it's a little bit thinner. You can see the difference here. There's a difference in color. This is a little more stiff when you pick it up and hold it. The corner doesn't really flop down. This is definitely thinner. It doesn't really stand up on its own. But this works just as well as this. So with the traditional screen printing material, I've been working on my own t-shirt design, and I have almost all my layers printed. So this is the design I was working on in class. So I had, my first layer is white, and this is using the Speedball Opaque printing inks. So my first layer is the palette with the wolf on it, and I printed this in white. And then my second layer was the silver that says wolves, and then I'm going to fill in my paint splotches on my palette with another color. So this is using the traditional screen printing. Gives you nice clean edges. It works well with the Speedball ink. And in the video that you will watch me demonstrating how to cut and apply your stencil to the screen, I was using the material from Joann Fabrics, and it works just the same as the one I bought off of Amazon. And the nice thing is it's more locally owned to me. I can go and purchase it at any time. I don't have to wait a day or two for shipping. And the other thing is I also get coupons for Joann Fabrics, so I can then also save money on it. They cost about the same amount of money. You're going to pay around $10 or something like that a yard. So it is more feasible for me to buy this material and work with it than to order off of Amazon. And as you can see, it works the same as the traditional screen printing. And like any little blurbs though, is not necessarily the cause from the fabric, because you can see I did several tests on this, but just something that sometimes occurs in screen printing. I got a little bit too much ink pressed through, and it leaked underneath my screen when I was printing, and that's just something that sometimes happens. But it does work as well. So this is what you're going to find on your hoops, is this sheer fabric. And as I said, you'll be watching the videos on how to attach your stencil to your screen so that it is ready for printing. But I'm going to show you how to stretch the screen. So in case we ever have to replace one of these, you'll know how to do this. So in my experimentation with this and using a embroidery hoop, I found that no matter what material I was using, and you can see even on this one it's a little gappy, it's not quite stretched as well as I would like it to be, is that the stretch it does may be fine for cross stitching or whatever you're embroidering, but for this type of work it doesn't hold the tension well enough. So what I found works well is I put a bead of hot glue on here. I try to make it as thin as possible, and then that will now give my fabric something to grip up against, so that when I put my piece of screen over top of this, whether it's traditional screen or the other polyester mesh that is just sold at Joann Fabrics or any other craft store that carries fabric, or even this rough material, is that it allows me to stretch it, and it keeps that stretch because it's no longer just slipping through because of the thinness of the fibers. The wood just did not clamp down well enough with it. So if you need to replace your screen, we will of course dismantle the one you are working with. If you have a stencil on it and you have to re-stretch a screen, you're going to have to remake your stencil. There's no way of taking this off and reapplying it to the new one. After a few printings of this one, I can already see where there's some separation of the adhesive to the fibers. So I am experimenting to see how long this can be used before it just ends up separating too much and we can no longer print with it. But when you go to stretch this new one, you're going to take everything off, as I said, your stencil, the old fabric. you're going to take your hoop and you're going to get a piece of fabric tooming. Now we always make this fabric larger than what we need, and you'll notice there's still some extras here. I don't like to trim it down because if it's just a case that it lost tension, I can take off my stencil, remake my stencil, and I can just have enough here to grip to re-stretch this. So in a way, you know, I do trim around this, so you are going to have some fabric wastage. There's no getting around that, but this is why we cut it a little bit larger. You need enough room to be able to grab a hold of something to help stretch it. So once I have my hoop down and I lay my cloth over top of it, I try to get it even all the way around. Then I grab the outer part of the hoop, and this is not going to be easy because that hot glue is on there. It is going to make it a very tight fit to start out with. So I unscrew my screw as far as I can and stretch this out, and I just start applying this over top, and I try to force this outer hoop over that hot glue. So it does take a little bit of patience, does take a little bit of work. And if worse comes to shove, we can use a hammer to help get it down over there. And when it's on there, you can see this is not completely stretched. You know, I can push my hand through it, it's very loose, but this starts the process. So when it's that difficult to apply, sometimes you can go ahead and start stretching. And what I do is I lay the flat side down, so the inside of my hoop here is available, and I just grab a hold of the fabric and I start slowly pulling it up. I use one hand to hold the hoop and the other to hold and pull the fabric upwards. And I just work my way around the hoop doing that. Sorry for the interruption earlier. So as I was mentioning, after I apply the outer frame, I then work my way around it, pulling on the fabric, using one hand to help hold this inner ring down and the other hand to help pull up fabric. And I do this usually before any tightening. If for some reason, after I apply the hot glue to that inner ring and put the outer ring on top, there is still a lot of space to work, then I will go ahead and tighten that outer ring some before doing any stretching. But I like to do it in this order just because then it gives me a little room to first start stretching. So as you can see there, when I press my hand, it's no longer coming out as far. I'm getting a nice tight stretch to the fabric. And what I'll do now is start tightening. So with that addition of rubber glue, sometimes it does become a little difficult to tighten by hand. So I will use some pliers, and I'll just give this a couple of turns to start tightening the rings. And after a couple of turns, then what I'll do is I'll go back and stretch my fabric again. I give it a couple of turns, I come back, pull again onto my fabric. Like there, I felt a little give, so That means that even with that tighten, that's still a little loose in that area. And again, I just work my way around, because when you do a screen printing, you want the screen to be nice and taut. So again, I'll check my frame, I'll check for the tightness, and you can just feel how much this has stretched, even by just moving your hand over top of this surface. So I'm going to give it another tightening. And depending on your frame, some of these will need a lot of tightening. Others, you barely have to do any type of movement with this to get the stretch to stay. But that's the whole goal of the tightening, is to help keep this fabric in place and stretched. So I'll go back and check any areas again. Around in here's where I had that area want to pull up before, and I'm not feeling anything give now. Okay, so that is now stretched. So this is ready for my stencil. And I'm going to do one more thing to this, and that is I'm going to trim up some of this fabric. Now again, I don't want to completely cut it very close to my frame. Since your stencil will be located near the center, a little excess won't hurt. But if this does end up becoming unstretched, I need enough fabric there to grab a hold of. So I usually lay it with the stretched part up. And again, I don't trim it really close. I just work my way around the frame, say about 1.5 inches of excess fabric left. And I just knock off these corners as I work my way around. So over here it's already pretty close to the frame, so I'm not going to trim anything off there. And just start back over here on this side and trim some of this excess fabric off of here. So now that I have that trimmed, I'm ready to apply my stencil to the stretched fabric, and that is what is covered in our next video.